In the summer of 2021, a 22-year-old woman from Long Island, New York, posted a series of images on Instagram from a converted white Ford Transit van. The hashtag was Vanlife. The captions were small and bright. The images showed red rock canyons, lodgepole pine forests, dawn light on a windshield, and a smiling young couple with their feet hanging out the back of a van in the American West. Her name was Gabrielle Venora Petito. Everyone called her Gabby. She was traveling with her fiancé, a 23-year-old man named Brian Christopher Laundrie. The trip was supposed to last 4 months. They had left their hometown of Blue Point, New York, in early July, and they were filming everything. They had a YouTube channel. They had a plan. They had a map. By the second week of September, Gabby Petito was being searched for by the FBI. By the third week of September, her body had been recovered in a national forest in Wyoming. By the second week of October, Brian Laundrie's remains had been found in a Florida swamp. By Thanksgiving of that year, the case had become the most watched true crime story on the American internet. This is what happened in between. Gabby Petito grew up in Blue Point, on the south shore of Long Island. She was the oldest of 6 children in a blended family. Her mother, Nicole Schmidt, and her stepfather, Jim Schmidt, lived on Long Island. Her father, Joseph Petito, lived in Florida. The family was close in the way that big blended American families often are, with group texts that ran for hours and holidays that bounced from one home to another. Gabby was small, 5'5", slim, blonde, with a quick smile that flashed across her whole face. She liked to draw. She liked yoga. She had a dream that was specific and modern. She wanted to travel the country in a van, document the trip on social media, and turn the documentation into a career. In 2021, that was not a strange dream. Tens of thousands of young Americans were doing exactly the same thing. The hashtag Vanlife had more than 9 billion views on TikTok. The van itself was a white 2012 Ford Transit Connect. It was small. The couple had converted it on a budget, with a plywood bed platform, a small camp stove, a battery pack, and a window curtain made from blackout cloth. They had decals on the back window. They had named it Loki, after the Norse god. Gabby's fiancé, Brian Laundrie, was 23. He had grown up in Northport, Florida, where his parents, Christopher and Roberta Laundrie, still lived. He and Gabby had known each other since high school. They had been engaged since the summer of 2020. On July 2nd, 2021, they pulled out of the Laundrie family driveway in Northport. The plan was to drive west, hit the national parks, work seasonal gigs along the way, post videos, and end up in Oregon by Christmas. To understand how the trip ended, you have to understand a little of how the relationship began. Gabby and Brian both attended Bayport Blue Point High School on Long Island. They graduated several years apart. Brian was a few years older. They reconnected in 2019 when Brian was working a retail job and Gabby was finishing high school. By the spring of 2020, they were living together. By the summer of 2020, they had moved to Northport, Florida to live with Brian's parents in the Wabasso Avenue house. The house at 1077 Wabasso Avenue is a single-story home with a small front yard, a paved driveway, and a privacy fence around the back. Christopher Laundrie worked in a service trade. Roberta Laundrie was a homemaker. Brian had a younger sister named Cassie. Gabby moved in. The arrangement was practical. The couple was saving money for the van trip. They both worked retail jobs in the area. They both posted occasional updates on social media. From the outside, in the 18 months before the van trip began, the relationship looked steady. What several friends and family members would later say in the press is that the relationship had not been steady on the inside. There had been arguments. There had been moments when Gabby was reportedly upset and isolated from her own family for weeks at a time. There had been at least one prior incident in 2020 when local police in Florida had been called to a domestic disturbance involving the couple. Although no charges had been filed and no public report had been generated, these details did not enter the public record until after Gabby was reported missing. None of them, on their own, would have predicted what eventually happened. But each of them, in retrospect, formed part of a pattern that the August 12th body camera footage in Moab put on full display for anyone who knew what to look for. The first 3 weeks of the trip went exactly the way the plan had said they would go. The couple visited Monument Rocks in Kansas. They posted yoga videos from a campsite in Colorado. They stopped at Zion National Park in Utah. They stopped at Bryce Canyon. They stopped at Capitol Reef. The Instagram feed was a slow rolling postcard. The YouTube channel posted its first long-form video on August 19th. The video was 8 minutes long. It was titled with the hashtag and the word adventure. It was edited by Gabby herself. The view count in the first week was modest. After September of that year, the same video would cross 14 million views in a single weekend. What the videos did not show was the friction underneath the trip. The friction was visible only in fragments. A hostel owner in Utah remembered that the couple seemed tense. A waitress in Salt Lake City remembered that Gabby cried at breakfast. The van itself had been parked for an hour outside a co-op grocery store in Moab, Utah, on the evening of August 11th, and the parking lot was about to become the most important parking lot in the case. On the afternoon of August 12th, 2021, the Moab City Police Department received a call from a witness. The witness said he had seen a man slap a young woman outside of a co-op called Moonflower in downtown Moab. The witness gave a description of the white transit van. The dispatcher logged the call. A patrol officer named Eric Pratt and a second officer named Daniel Robbins located the van on Main Street. They pulled it over near the entrance to Arches National Park. The body camera footage from that traffic stop is now one of the most watched body camera videos in the history of the American internet. It runs about an hour. It is, depending on the viewer, either a textbook example of officers managing a difficult domestic call or a textbook example of a domestic call mishandled in the worst possible way. In the footage, Gabby Petito is crying. Her face is red. She is holding her arms across her chest. She tells the officers that she has been having a hard time. She blames herself. She says she has anxiety. She says her partner did not hurt her. She says she hit him first. The officers separate the couple. Brian Laundrie is calm. He is articulate. He smiles at the camera. He says Gabby has been having episodes. He says he was trying to take her keys away from her so she could not drive while upset. The officers consult. They make a decision. They classify the incident as a mental and emotional break and not as domestic violence. They separate the couple for the night. Brian gets a hotel room. Gabby stays in the van. The next morning, the couple reunites and continues west. The portion of the body camera footage that the public watched the most is the conversation with Gabby. The portion that mattered most to the eventual independent investigation, however, was the part the public watched the least. It was the conversation with the witness. The witness who flagged the incident outside Moonflower Co-op was named Christopher. He had been pulling out of the co-op parking lot when he saw, across the lot, a young man strike a young woman. The young woman ran toward the van. The young man followed. There was a struggle. The witness called it in. He told dispatch that he had seen a man hit a woman. He repeated that description to the responding officers when they tracked him down later. By the time the responding officers reached Brian and Gabby, the dynamic on the curbside had inverted. Brian was calm. Gabby was crying. Gabby took the blame. The officers asked her if she had hit Brian. She said yes. Under Utah law in 2021, an officer responding to a domestic incident was required to make a primary aggressor determination. And where the determination identified the primary aggressor, that person was supposed to be arrested. The Moab officers concluded, on the scene, that Gabby was the primary aggressor. They issued a warning. They separated the couple for the night. And they let the case go. The independent investigator who later reviewed the call would write, in a report released in January of 2022, that the officers had failed to follow Utah's domestic violence statute, had failed to interview the witness in detail, had failed to recognize a coercive control dynamic, and had failed to apply the primary aggressor analysis correctly. The report did not say the officers caused Gabby's death. It said the officers had missed the chance to intervene at the moment when intervention would have mattered most. By August 20th, the couple had crossed into Wyoming. They camped at a dispersed use site in the Bridger-Teton National Forest, northeast of Jackson, in a meadow off Spread Creek Road. Spread Creek is a glacial creek that drains down out of the Tetons into the Snake River. The campsite is free, primitive, and beautiful. It is also remote. The cell signal is weak. There is no ranger station for miles. A vlogger couple named Jen and Kyle Bethune drove past the white Ford Transit van on Spread Creek Road on the evening of August 27th. They did not get out. They did not speak to anyone. They simply filmed B-roll for their own travel channel as they drove past. The footage shows the white van parked alone in a meadow at dusk. The Bethunes uploaded the footage to YouTube months later, and that single 30-second clip became one of the central pieces of evidence in the timeline. On August 27th, Gabby Petito had her last documented contact with her family. She sent a text message to her mother. The message was short. It said the words, "Love you." The phone was a black iPhone. The message went through a tower in northern Utah. A second message was sent on August 30th. It also came from Gabby's phone. It said the words, "No service in Yosemite." Nicole Schmidt later told the FBI that the message did not sound like her daughter. Gabby would have written it differently. The phrasing was wrong. The punctuation was wrong. And, most importantly, Gabby and Brian had not been planning to go anywhere near Yosemite. That message is now believed by investigators to have been sent by someone who was not Gabby Petito. On September 1st, 2021, the white Ford Transit Connect pulled into the Laundrie family driveway at 1077 Wabasso Avenue in Northport, Florida. Brian Laundrie was driving. The passenger seat was empty. Brian did not call Gabby's family. He did not text them. He went into the house. He stayed quiet. The van sat in the driveway. The neighbors saw it. A neighbor's Ring camera captured the arrival. Gabby's family did not know yet that the van had come home. For 10 days, Nicole Schmidt called and texted her daughter and got no response. On September 11th, she called the Suffolk County Police Department in New York and reported Gabby missing. The case was opened that afternoon. Within 48 hours, the FBI was involved. Within 72 hours, the white transit van was seized from the Laundrie driveway and processed for evidence. The story broke on national news on September 15th. By September 16th, the hashtag for Gabby's name had crossed 500 million views on TikTok. The FBI ran the timeline backward. The phone records showed the last verified contact in northern Utah on August 27th. The credit card records showed gas purchases ending in northwestern Wyoming around the same date. The Bethune YouTube footage placed the white van at Spread Creek on August 27th. Search teams flooded the Bridger-Teton National Forest. On the morning of September 19th, 2021, a search team located human remains in the Spread Creek dispersed camping area. The remains were identified the next day by dental records as those of Gabrielle Venora Petito. The cause of death was certified by the Teton County coroner as manual strangulation. The manner was certified as homicide. The case had a victim. It had a body. It had a location. What it did not yet have was a suspect in custody. In the 4 days between Gabby being reported missing and the discovery of her remains in the Bridger-Teton National Forest, something happened on the internet that had not happened to a missing person case before. The hashtag for her name on TikTok crossed several hundred million views. Independent investigators and amateur sleuths pored over every frame of her social media. They cross-referenced timestamps on Instagram posts with weather data, with credit card receipts, with vehicle dashcam footage, and with publicly available campground reservation systems. A user on TikTok identified the Spread Creek dispersed camping area before the FBI publicly named the location by matching the foliage in a photograph posted to Gabby's Instagram on August 19th, with terrain features visible in Google Maps. A married couple from Florida, Jen and Kyle Bethune, were driving through Wyoming on August 27th in a recreational vehicle. They had taken passive dashcam footage as they drove, days after Gabby was reported missing. They remembered the white van and went back through their own footage. They found the van. They posted the footage to YouTube. The clip became one of the central time anchors of the entire FBI timeline. The phenomenon was unprecedented. It was also in places ugly. Tip lines were flooded with low-quality information. Other missing person cases involving women of color in the same week received almost no attention by comparison. Several family members of other missing women, including the family of Robert Lowry, a Houston man missing at the same time, publicly raised the question of why some disappearances mobilize a national audience and others do not. The conversation that followed has been called, in academic literature since, the missing white woman syndrome conversation, and it became a central piece of how the Petito case is now taught in journalism schools. What the internet got right and what the internet got wrong became its own story. The hashtag pressure almost certainly accelerated the search. The geolocation work by amateur investigators was, in places, ahead of federal field teams. But the volume of misinformation also slowed the investigation in places, and federal agents in Wyoming spent meaningful hours running down tips that turned out to be unrelated. By the time Gabby was reported missing, Brian Laundrie had already left the Laundrie family home a second time. According to his parents, Christopher and Roberta Laundrie, Brian had left the house on September 14th, telling them he was going hiking in a nearby preserve called the Carlton Reserve in Sarasota County. He took a backpack. He did not take his phone. The Laundrie family did not call the police that day. They did not call the next day. They eventually reported Brian missing on September 17th, 3 days after he had left the house, and only after the FBI had begun searching the Laundrie property in connection with Gabby's disappearance. For 5 weeks, the Carlton Reserve became the most searched piece of swamp in the United States. The terrain is 90 square miles of cypress swamp, palmetto, alligator habitat, and seasonally flooded forest. The summer of 2021 had been wet. Some of the trails were under several feet of water. The search teams included FBI agents, Sarasota County deputies, K-9 units, and dozens of independent volunteers. Cable news ran live drone footage of the swamp every evening for a month. On October 20th, 2021, Christopher and Roberta Laundrie joined the search themselves. Within hours, in an area the family said they knew Brian frequented, the parents and the FBI located a backpack, a notebook, and human remains. The remains were identified again by dental records as those of Brian Christopher Laundrie. The death was eventually ruled a suicide by gunshot wound to the head. Inside the recovered backpack was a notebook. It was waterlogged. The pages were stuck together. Forensic specialists at the FBI laboratory in Quantico, Virginia, separated the pages over the course of several weeks. In the notebook, Brian Laundrie wrote a confession. The confession admitted, in unambiguous language, that he had ended Gabby Petito's life at the Spread Creek campsite. He framed the act in the language of mercy. The framing was not believed by investigators. The medical examiner had certified strangulation. There was nothing merciful about the manner of death. The notebook closed the case for the law enforcement community. The killer was identified. The killer was deceased. There would be no trial. The notebook did not close the case for Gabby's family. The Carlton Reserve, formerly the T. Mabry Carlton Jr. Memorial Reserve, sits east of Northport, Florida, in Sarasota County. It is one of the largest pieces of contiguous undeveloped land in southwestern Florida. It is 90 square miles of palmetto, pine flatwoods, cypress dome, and slough. In the wet season, large portions of it are under standing water. Alligators are common. Wild boar are common. Bobcats and panthers move through the deeper interior. There are trails, but the trails fade into open ground in places, and the navigation aids that visitors are used to in state and national parks are not consistently posted. For the 5 weeks between September 14th and October, 20th of 2021, the Carlton Reserve was the most televised swamp in the United States. Cable news set up live cameras at the trailheads. Drone operators worked in coordinated rotations. The Sarasota County Sheriff's Office, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the Northport Police Department, the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, and a network of volunteer search dog handlers worked the area in shifts. Independent investigators, including a former bounty hunter and several true crime podcasters, drove down from the Northeast and offered to assist. Some of them helped, some of them got in the way. The breakthrough finally came on October 20th. Christopher and Roberta Laundrie joined the search themselves that morning. They told investigators that, with the water levels finally beginning to drop, they wanted to walk an area Brian had frequented. The area in question was a section of the reserve along the Myakkahatchee Creek. Within hours of the parents joining the search, a backpack was located. Inside the backpack were a notebook, a digital camera, and personal effects. Human remains were located nearby. The fact that the parents themselves located the area immediately raised questions in the public mind about how much they had known and when they had known it. Those questions were never fully resolved. The Laundrie family attorney, Stephen Bertolino, made public statements emphasizing that the family had cooperated with law enforcement. The Petito family civil litigation that followed alleged the opposite. The legal aftermath of the case stretched across 2 states and several years. In Florida, the Petito family filed a wrongful death claim against the estate of Brian Laundrie, which produced a default judgment in 2022 and the public release of additional documents from the Laundrie family. In a separate civil action, the Petito family pursued claims against the Laundrie parents based on communications the parents allegedly received from Brian after Gabby's death and during the period when Gabby was being searched for. That action proceeded through the Florida courts for several years. The parties eventually resolved the matter without disclosing the terms. In Utah, the wrongful death claim against Moab City and the responding officers was litigated through the federal district court. The case was permitted to proceed to discovery. The Moab City Council voted to settle the claim in early 2024. The settlement amount was made public. The independent review of the August 12th call, conducted by a Utah law enforcement agency outside Moab, had already been published in January of 2022. The review identified 7 distinct procedural failures in the original call. Each of the 7 was used as a training case in subsequent Utah Law Enforcement Academy curriculum. Internally at the Moab City Police Department, the response to the case was significant. Several officers left the department. Internal training procedures around domestic violence calls were rewritten. The department adopted a mandatory secondary review process for any call involving a couple traveling together in a recreational vehicle after the review concluded that the transitory nature of the relationship had contributed to the misclassification of the original incident. If you go back through Gabby Petito's social media in chronological order, the last public image she ever posted is a photograph taken on a sunset trail in Ogden Canyon, Utah, on August 25, 2021. She is standing in front of a hand-lettered wooden sign. The sign is a row of letters spelling out a single word in arch typography. The word is the word happy. That is the public last known frame. There is also a private last known frame. It is the body camera footage from August 12th in Moab. The footage is on the public record. Anyone can watch it. In the footage, Gabby is alive. She is crying. She is sitting on a curb on Main Street in Moab. An officer is asking her if she is okay. She says yes. She says she just needs a minute. She says she loves her partner. 26 days later, Gabby Petito was dead. The officer who took her statement that day in Moab was placed on administrative leave for several months while the agency reviewed the call. The agency's eventual finding was that the officer had failed to recognize a domestic violence dynamic and had failed to follow Utah's mandatory dual arrest policy in such cases. The officer resigned in 2022 In November of 2021, Gabby's parents, Nicole Schmidt, Jim Schmidt, Joseph Petito, and Tara Petito, established the Gabby Petito Foundation. The foundation was registered as a nonprofit in Florida. Its mission, as stated on its public materials, is to support families with missing loved ones and to fund domestic violence prevention programs. In its first 3 years of operation, the foundation funded victim advocate positions in several jurisdictions and partnered with multiple state-level missing person initiatives. In 2022, the family filed a civil lawsuit in Utah against Moab City and several officers connected with the August 12th call. The lawsuit alleged wrongful death stemming from the failure to follow the Utah domestic violence statute. The case was litigated for several years. A confidential settlement was eventually reached. In a separate civil action filed in Florida, the family filed suit against the Laundrie family. That action was based on communications that the Laundrie parents allegedly received from Brian after Gabby's death and before he died. Communications that the Petito family alleged contained information that should have been shared with law enforcement and with Gabby's parents. That case was also resolved in a manner that the parties did not publicly disclose. The Federal Bureau of Investigation made operational changes after the case as well. The agency's National Missing Person Desk implemented a new policy on the integration of social media trail analysis into adult missing person reports, and the National Center for the Analysis of Violent Crime added a new module on coercive control and homicide indicators in domestic relationships involving long-distance travel. The case of Gabrielle Venora Petito changed the way American police departments train officers on domestic violence calls. It changed the way the federal government tracks missing person cases with social media trails. It changed, for at least one summer in the United States, the way every young woman with a backpack and a van and a hashtag thought about the road ahead. And it left, in its wake, a conversation about which disappearances become national news and which ones do not. That is now part of the permanent record of how the country talks about missing women. The summer Gabby Petito disappeared was a Vanlife summer for a generation. Tens of thousands of young women were posting from converted Sprinter vans, from Subaru Outbacks with platform beds, from rooftop tents, from rented camper vans they were splitting 4 ways. The aesthetic was everywhere. The product placement was everywhere. The hashtag was everywhere. The summer after Gabby Petito disappeared looked different. The vans did not stop moving. The hashtag did not die. But something in the conversation underneath it changed. Comment sections filled up with women asking other women if they were safe. Comment sections filled up with women asking other women to text a friend when they got to the next stop. A new vocabulary entered the lifestyle. People started talking about coercive control on a hiking channel. People started talking about Marzi's law on a cooking channel. People started talking about what to do if a partner is escalating on a channel about converting a school bus. The case did that. There is a frame from the body camera footage in Moab that is the frame of this case for me. It is not the most cited frame. The most cited frame is the one of Gabby crying in the front passenger seat. The frame I keep coming back to is later in the encounter, when Gabby is sitting on the curb and an officer is standing a few feet away, and Gabby is laughing nervously, and her hands are doing the small wave-it-off motion that anyone who has ever been in a relationship that is ending has done at least once. That is the frame that explains the case. That is the frame that explains why the policy changed. She was not lying to the officer. She was managing him. She was making him comfortable so the encounter would end. She was, in that moment, performing the de-escalation that a domestic violence statute is supposed to require the officer to perform. She was doing the officer's job for him because she wanted to get back in the van. 20 days later, she was dead in the woods of Wyoming. That is what it means to say that a case changed how a country trains its officers. The officers who trained after Moab were trained on a frame of a young woman doing a wave-it-off motion on a curb in Utah, and they were taught to look at that motion and understand that it was a signal, not a clarification. There is no way to make Gabby Petito alive again. There is a way to make sure the next 22-year-old, who sits on a curb in front of an officer in a small American town, gets a different outcome than she did. The training videos that the Department of Justice now distributes to police departments contain, with the family's permission, real footage from August 12, 2021. New officers in domestic violence training watch Gabby Petito for 9 minutes before they ever get into a patrol car. That is the legacy. That is, in the most practical and unsentimental sense, what her last known frame did. It became a teaching tool. If you have a case you want covered on this channel, the email is in the description. The next episode of Last Known Frame drops on Friday. It is the case of a young woman in Lafayette, Louisiana, who got on her bicycle at 2 in the morning to ride home from a friend's house. She never made it.